The sound of metal scraping against metal still haunts me. The lock turned from the outside, followed by his voice. The voice that once called me mom in the sweetest tone, now spitting venom. Rot in there, old woman. Maybe by the time I'm back, you'll have learned some respect. I froze where I stood, my trembling fingers still clutching the frame of the half-open door. Then came the shove, rough final. And the world went dark behind me as the door slammed shut. A moment later, I heard the unmistakable click of the bolt sliding into place. For a heartbeat, I thought it was some awful joke. I waited for the sound of his laughter softening, for the door to open again for him to say, "Oh mother, you take things too seriously." But there was only silence. Then laughter, distant, muffled, feminine. His wife's. Her voice floated through the thin wood, bright and cruel. "Hurry, Eric, we'll miss our flight. Luxury suites waiting." The car engine roared to life. Tires crunched over gravel. The laughter faded into the wind. And then there was nothing. I stared around the small storage cabin, bare concrete floor, a cracked window sealed with wire, and the faint smell of mold. A single shaft of light slipped through the slats, cutting across the dust that hung thick in the air. My heart pounded in my ears. "Eric," I called, my voice trembling. "Son, please, what are you doing?" No answer. I grabbed the door handle and twisted until my hand burned. It didn't move. I hit it with my fists, then my shoulder. Pain shot through my arm. But the door stood firm, stubborn as his silence. Something small and metallic slipped from my pocket and clattered to the floor. My phone. I scrambled for it, desperate, and the sight broke me. The screen had shattered on impact, a spiderweb of cracks glinting in the dusty light. I pressed the button again and again, but it stayed black, dead, like my hope in that moment. My legs gave way. I sank to the floor, gasping. Every muscle trembled. I wasn't just trapped, I was discarded. I pressed my ear to the door, praying to hear footsteps. A second thought, remorse. Instead, I caught faint echoes of their voices outside, light, careless, planning their luxury cruise. "Can you believe she still thinks she can tell me what to do?" "Don't let her guilt you, honey," his wife's voice cooed. "This trip is for us. She'll survive." My breath caught in my throat. Survive? The air in the room grew thick, heavy. My hands shook uncontrollably. I looked down at them. The same hands that once braided his hair before school, packed his lunches, wiped his tears. They were swollen now, lined with years of labor and love. And those very hands had raised the man who just locked me away like garbage. My throat burned as I whispered to the emptiness. "After all I did for him, this is how my son repays me?" I slid to the floor, back against the cold wall, staring up at the low ceiling. My mind raced between disbelief and memory. His first steps, his first broken toy, the fevered nights I stayed awake praying he'd pull through. How does a mother process that the child she gave everything to now sees her as a burden to be hidden away? The hours crawled by. The air grew stale. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. I tried not to panic, but every sound, the creak of the beams, the hum of distant cars, reminded me of the outside world that I was no longer part of. My body was trapped, but my mind refused to surrender. Somewhere deep within me, beneath the layers of pain and exhaustion, a small, defiant ember flickered to life. Because this wasn't the first time I'd been cornered by life. And unlike him, I knew how to survive. Before I go on, if stories like this make your heart beat faster, stories that remind us what strength really means, make sure to subscribe right now so you never miss what happens next. Now where was I? Yes, the darkness, the silence, the betrayal. I leaned my head back and laughed softly. The kind of laugh that comes when pain and realization mix into something sharp. He thought he'd broken me. He thought I'd sit quietly until they returned from their shining vacation, too weak to fight back. But if only he knew. If only he knew the secret I'd been preparing all along. My name is Eleanor, and I am 68 years old. But before I became the woman locked in a dark room by her own son, I was just a mother. A woman who believed that love and sacrifice were the same thing. I wasn't born with much. My life began in a small working-class neighborhood, where dreams were luxuries and survival was a daily task. At 22, I married a man named Richard. Charming, ambitious, and for a time good to me. But when our son Daniel turned 8, Richard walked out, leaving me with a mortgage, a sewing machine, and a child who looked at me like I was his entire world. That day something inside me hardened. Not out of anger, but resolve. I told myself, if I can't give my son a father, I'll give him everything else. So I worked. My hands, once soft, grew calloused from stitching, mending, and hemming clothes until my eyes blurred under a weak lamp. I took in neighbors' laundry, cleaned offices at night, and patched uniforms for schoolboys who had mothers richer than me. Every coin I earned had Daniel's name written on it. I still remember one night vividly. It was raining so hard the roof leaked. I was stitching a wedding gown for a customer while Daniel sat beside me doing his homework. He looked up and said, "Mom, when I grow up, I'll buy you a big house. You'll never have to sew again." Those words became my heartbeat. To the outside world, I was just another tired seamstress. But to Daniel, I was his whole foundation. The woman who could turn scraps of fabric into a future. I skipped meals to pay for his school books, sold my wedding ring to cover tuition fees, and walked to work when I couldn't afford bus fare. He never complained, never asked for too much. When he won his first academic award at 14, he ran home and threw his arms around me, whispering, "You see, Mom? It's all because of you." That moment erased every ache, every sleepless night. When he graduated from university, the first in our family to do so, I cried so hard I couldn't breathe. My little boy had done it. My sacrifices, I thought, had finally paid off. The years after graduation felt like a dream. Daniel landed a job at a prestigious engineering firm. He bought me gifts I never asked for, a microwave, a new pair of shoes, a gold locket with his initials. Every Sunday he came home for dinner, kissed my forehead and said, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll take care of you now." Those words wrapped around my heart like a warm blanket. But life has a way of changing quietly, almost kindly at first. You don't notice the distance until it's already a wall. It started with shorter visits. A call once a week turned into once a month. He'd answer with a distracted tone, "Sorry, Mom, work's been insane." I believed him, of course. Because mothers always believe. When he did visit, he wore fancy suits and expensive watches. He smelled of cologne and success, the kind of life I had prayed for him to have. But there was something else too. A faint discomfort, a restlessness. Like he no longer fit inside the small cozy home that had once been his world. I would catch him glancing at the peeling paint, the worn-out furniture, the frayed curtains. I'd offer him tea, and he'd politely decline. "Too much sugar, Mom. I'm trying to stay fit." I laughed it off at first, thinking it was just part of him growing up, moving on. But the laughter started to sound hollow, even to my own ears. One evening I decided to surprise him at his office. I wanted to take him lunch, something homemade, his favorite stew. The receptionist looked confused when I said his name. She called through the phone and then smiled awkwardly. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Sanders. Mr. Sanders says he's in a meeting." But I heard his voice in the background, laughing, talking. "Not in a meeting. Not too busy. Just embarrassed." I walked home that day carrying untouched food and a sinking feeling that my son, my everything, was starting to see me as an inconvenience. Still, I didn't complain. I told myself that this is how life works. Children grow up. They have their own lives. Mothers become memories in photographs. But deep down I prayed the bond we shared, the bond built on sweat and sacrifice, would always pull him back to me. I remember one particular Sunday dinner when he showed up looking nervous. He cleared his throat and said, "Mom, I want you to meet someone." Her name was Sabrina. Elegant, polished, her perfume lingering long after she entered a room. I smiled and welcomed her warmly, not realizing that her arrival would be the first crack in the foundation I had built. Sabrina shook my hand lightly, her gaze scanning my modest living room, the faded couch, the crocheted doilies, the pictures of Daniel through the years. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Such a cozy home," she said. "You must really love tradition." I didn't catch the tone then. I was too busy feeling proud that my son had brought someone home, that he trusted me enough to meet the woman he loved. That night after they left, I looked at the empty plates and smiled through tears. He's finally happy, I thought. And that's all that matters. If only I'd known what was coming. Because love, the kind of blind, burning love I had for my son, doesn't warn you when it's about to destroy you. It doesn't whisper, "You've given enough." It just keeps taking until one day there's nothing left of you to give. And that, I suppose, is how it all began. The story of how a mother's devotion slowly became her undoing. Sabrina. Even now her name tastes like cold metal on my tongue. At first I was just grateful that my son had found someone. I'd prayed for years that he'd meet a good woman. Someone kind, patient, someone who would love him the way I had. When Daniel told me she was a marketing executive, elegant and well-traveled, I pictured a daughter-in-law who'd bring laughter into our home. But from the moment she stepped inside, I felt a chill beneath her perfume. The first time she visited after their wedding, she stood in the middle of my small living room, her heels clicking against the wooden floor. Her eyes darted from the old family portraits to the faded curtains I'd sewn myself. She smiled politely. The kind of smile you wear when you're being patient with something beneath you. "Such a nostalgic place," she said, brushing a speck of dust off a chair before sitting. "Daniel told me you've lived here forever." "That's admirable." I thanked her, trying not to read too much into her words. But the way she said forever made it sound like a disease that needed curing. That day I served them my son's favorite meal. Oxtail stew, slow cooked just the way he loved as a boy. He didn't even taste it before Sabrina said, "Oh, we don't really eat heavy foods like that anymore. Too much fat." Daniel hesitated, smiled awkwardly, then pushed the bowl away. "Yeah, Mom, we're trying to eat cleaner." The moment was small, but it left a bruise. In the weeks that followed, things began to change. Calls became shorter. Visits more hurried. When they came, Sabrina would sit scrolling on her phone, her manicured nails tapping endlessly, while Daniel and I tried to talk. And every time I mentioned something simple, a memory, a request, a story from the past, she'd glance up with a faint smirk, like my words were relics from an era she couldn't wait to forget. One Sunday, she arrived carrying a brochure. "There's a new assisted living community just outside town," she said, placing it on my table. "They're lovely places, really. Independent units, on-site nurses, gardens. You'd fit right in." I blinked. Fit right in. Daniel cleared his throat. "She just means, you'd have company. People your age." "My age," I repeated. "Daniel, this is my home." Sabrina's smile didn't falter. "Of course. It's just modern life can be overwhelming, and you deserve comfort. Besides, we might need to use this place later, maybe renovate it, rent it out. A little extra income never hurts." She said it casually, as if she were discussing furniture, not the house I'd spent 40 years building with my hands. That night, after they left, I sat alone at my sewing table. My hands trembled so much I couldn't thread the needle. I wasn't angry, not yet, just hollow. Every mother dreams her child will grow wings, but no one tells you how it feels when they fly so high they can't see you anymore. Over the months, Sabrina's visits turned from occasional to constant. Not to see me, but to inspect. She'd open cupboards, move furniture, comment on the clutter. One afternoon, I came into the living room to find her holding an old photo of Daniel on his 10th birthday, face smeared with cake, grinning ear to ear. "He was adorable back then," she said. "But you really should frame fewer of these. The place feels stuck in time." "Those are memories," I said softly. She tilted her head. "Sometimes holding on too tightly keeps people from moving forward." The words stung more than I let on. I wanted to believe she meant well, that her coldness was just misunderstanding. Different backgrounds, different upbringings. But the truth was more cruel. She wanted to erase me, inch by inch, from Daniel's life. And she was succeeding. One evening, I overheard them whispering in the hallway. I hadn't meant to listen, but their voices carried through the thin walls. "Sabrina, she doesn't even try to change, Daniel. It's like she wants you stuck here forever." "Daniel, she's my mother." "Sabrina, exactly. And she'll always use that to guilt you. You're not a child anymore. You need to live your own life." Silence. Then Daniel's quiet sigh. "You're right." Those two words cut deeper than any insult ever could. After that night, I noticed things disappearing. My spare keys. My old landline. Even my sewing scissors gone. When I asked, Daniel brushed it off. "We're just helping you organize, Mom. You misplace things." It was such a small lie, but it carried the weight of something much larger. Soon after, they convinced me to transfer the deed of my house into Daniel's name. For legal convenience, they said. I trusted him, as I always had. I signed the papers with a smile, believing I was making things easier for him. But I remember the way Sabrina's eyes glittered when I did. The way she placed her manicured hand over his and said softly, "It's for the best." In that moment, something deep inside me whispered a warning. A quiet voice I tried to ignore. I told myself I was being paranoid, that they loved me, that this was just the new rhythm of family life. But love doesn't make you feel small. Love doesn't erase your place in your own home. Looking back, I realized that was when the divide truly began. Subtle, quiet, dressed in politeness. Sabrina didn't need to shout to destroy me. She just smiled while pulling my son further and further away. And I, foolishly, mistook that silence for peace. It's strange how betrayal doesn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it comes softly, through the sound of your own child's laughter fading from your doorway. Months passed after the wedding, and my home grew quieter. The laughter that once filled my Sundays had vanished, replaced by the ticking of the old clock in the hallway. At first, I told myself Daniel was just busy, new marriage, new job, new responsibilities. That's what I said to the neighbors when they asked why he didn't visit anymore. But deep down, I knew something had changed. The warmth in his voice was gone. Every phone call sounded like a duty, not affection. "Mom, I'll come by soon, I promise," he'd say. Weeks turned into months. Promises turned into silence. When he finally did visit, it was never alone. Sabrina was always with him. Perfect hair, perfect smile, perfectly cold. She'd walk around my living room as though inspecting it for flaws. Daniel would sit stiffly beside her, his eyes darting toward her whenever I spoke, as if waiting for her approval before answering. One afternoon, I made the mistake of asking if they'd stay for dinner. "I made your favorite," I said, proud of the stew simmering on the stove. "Oxtail with pepper, just how you loved it." Sabrina wrinkled her nose. "Daniel's cut down on red meat. Too unhealthy." He smiled apologetically. "Yeah, Mom. Maybe next time." I nodded, forcing a smile as the scent of the stew filled the silence. After they left, I sat alone at the table, staring at two untouched plates. That was the night I began to understand what loneliness truly felt like. Still, I kept trying. I sent messages, little reminders of love. He'd reply with short phrases. "Thanks, Mom. Busy now. Talk later." Eventually, even those stopped coming. Then came the moment I will never forget. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon when I decided to visit them. I carried a small basket with homemade pastries, his childhood favorite. I wanted to surprise them to remind him of home. When I knocked on their apartment door, Sabrina opened it. She looked surprised, no, irritated. "Oh," she said, blocking the doorway slightly. "We weren't expecting visitors." I smiled gently. "I brought something for Daniel." He appeared behind her, looking uncomfortable. "Mom, you didn't have to come all this way. I wanted to see you. It's been so long." Sabrina sighed softly, tapping her manicured nail against the doorframe. "We're actually on our way out, Eleanor. Maybe next week." Next week. Always next week. I looked at my son, my boy. And I saw something unfamiliar in his eyes. Not anger. Not love. Just distance. He took the basket from my hands and said, "Thanks, Mom. I'll call you, okay?" The door closed before I could answer. I stood there for a long time in the rain, the chill soaking through my sweater. I told myself not to cry, that maybe they really were busy, that maybe I was being dramatic. But the truth pressed on me like the storm overhead. I was no longer part of his life. After that, I stopped visiting. I told myself that giving him space was the loving thing to do. But every night, I'd sit by the window waiting for headlights that never came. One day he called, his voice impatient. "Mom, Sabrina and I have been talking. Maybe it's time you hired some help. You know, someone to assist around the house." I frowned. Why would I need help? I'm perfectly capable. He sighed. Mom, the house is old. You're older now. It's just safer. Older now. The words hung heavy in the air. I bit back tears. I see, I said quietly. That's how it always began. With concern that sounded like kindness but carried the taste of rejection. From that day on, everything I did seemed to bother them. If I called too often, I was clingy. If I didn't, I was cold. I stopped knowing how to be a mother to him. Then came the breaking point. I had fallen ill. A fever that wouldn't break. My body ached and I could barely stand. I called Daniel, my voice weak. Son, I'm not feeling well. Could you come by? He paused. I heard the faint sound of laughter in the background, music, clinking glasses. Mom, we're out of town. I'm sure it's nothing serious. Just rest. Daniel, please. I need. The line went dead. That night, alone and shaking under the thin blanket, I stared at the ceiling and felt something inside me unravel. For years I'd built my life around that boy. His happiness, his future. Now I realized I had built it so completely that I'd forgotten my own. The fever broke 2 days later, but the pain didn't. A week after, I heard from a neighbor that Daniel and Sabrina had bought a new car. A luxury model. I smiled when I heard it, because that's what mothers do, even when it hurts. But deep down, something cold settled in my chest. It wasn't anger yet, just clarity. One evening, when they finally visited again, I overheard them talking in the next room. I hadn't meant to listen, but their voices carried easily through the thin walls. Sabrina. She's always calling. Always needing something. You can't live your life if she keeps hanging on like this. Daniel. She's just lonely. Sabrina. She's manipulative. Don't you see it? She uses guilt. She'll ruin everything we've built. Daniel's silence was louder than any words. I stepped away before they saw me, my hands trembling. That was the night I realized my son no longer saw me as a mother. He saw me as a burden. A few days later, they came with boxes. We're renovating the house, Daniel said. It's time to declutter. I watched as Sabrina gave orders to the movers, pointing at my furniture, my memories, my late husband's chair, my sewing table. Gone. That evening, when they left, I sat alone in an empty room that no longer felt like home. The air smelled of dust and betrayal. And for the first time, I stopped crying. Because tears were for love, and whatever I'd shared with my son, it wasn't love anymore. I looked around the bare walls and whispered, he's ashamed of me. My own son is ashamed of me. The truth settled like ice. I had spent my life building him up, only for him to dismantle everything I was. But somewhere beneath the numbness, a quiet spark began to flicker. I didn't know it then, but that spark would become my salvation. The one thing that would keep me alive when the locks finally clicked shut. The day it happened, the sky was painfully bright. The kind of brightness that makes everything seem too calm, too ordinary for the cruelty that's about to unfold. Daniel and Sabrina had stopped by unexpectedly that morning. He looked tense, she looked radiant, dressed in a new designer outfit and sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. I thought maybe they'd come to make peace. Foolish, hopeful me. Mom, Daniel said, avoiding my eyes. We're heading out of town for a few days. A little getaway. Oh, I smiled faintly. That sounds lovely. Where to? Greece, Sabrina answered with a grin. A luxury cruise. You know, something we deserve after all our hard work. I nodded, trying to ignore the hollow ache in my chest. That sounds nice, dear. Enjoy yourselves. She looked around the house, then at me. Actually, before we go, we need to make sure you're safe here. You keep wandering around too much lately. Daniel told me you almost slipped in the kitchen last week. I didn't slip, I said, frowning. I dropped a cup. But she was already walking toward the back door, where an old storage room sat. The one Daniel had renovated months ago. You could keep some of your things in here, she said. More space, less clutter. I followed her, unease prickling at the back of my neck. The room smelled faintly of cleaning products and stale air. She stepped aside and gestured for me to take a look inside. See? Freshly painted. Daniel even fixed the window latch for you. I stepped in, scanning the small space. Plain walls, No furniture except an old chair and a folded blanket in the corner. And then in one swift motion, the door slammed behind me. I spun around. The handle rattled, but didn't turn. "Daniel," I called, panic rising. "Open the door." Through the wooden panels, I heard his voice, cold, unfamiliar. "Stay in there, Mom. You need to learn to stop interfering. We'll talk when we're back." And then Sabrina's laughter, sharp and triumphant. "Rot in there, old woman. Maybe by the time we return, you'll learn some respect." My heart stopped. I pounded on the door with both fists until my arms ached. "Daniel, please. You can't do this." Their footsteps faded. A car door slammed. The engine roared to life. And then they were gone. I stood there, frozen, listening to the silence settle around me like a curse. The room was dim, the only light seeping through a narrow window near the ceiling. I tried the latch, sealed shut. My phone. Gone. Sabrina must have taken it earlier when she'd asked me to check the Wi-Fi settings. Hours passed. My throat burned from shouting, my voice cracking against the walls. I pounded until my palms stung. No one came. As night fell, the air turned cold. My stomach twisted in hunger. My mouth felt like sandpaper. The only sound was my own heartbeat and the faint drip of water from a pipe overhead. I thought of all the nights I had stayed awake for him, rocking him through fevers, sewing his school uniform, praying for his safety. And now he had locked me away like an animal. At some point, exhaustion dragged me down. I curled up on the cold floor, tears soaking into the sleeve of my sweater. Every muscle ached, but worse was the ache in my soul, a deep, hollow kind that no rest could cure. When morning came, I tried to think clearly. My mind refused to surrender. I searched the walls, the corners, the cracks. There had to be a way out. That's when I noticed it, the faint shimmer beneath a loose floorboard near the chair. I pried it up with trembling fingers. Hidden underneath was an old plastic pouch, something I'd tucked away months ago after Sabrina first started controlling everything. Inside was my backup phone, cheap, dusty, but with enough charge for one call. I turned it on, praying it would still work. The screen flickered weakly but came to life. I scrolled through the few saved contacts and found one name, Amara. Amara had been my neighbor years ago, a retired nurse with a kind heart and a loud laugh. When she moved away, she told me, "Call me if you ever need anything. I mean anything." I pressed call. The line rang once, twice. Then her voice, warm, worried. "Eleanor? Are you all right?" I couldn't hold it in anymore. The words came out in gasps. They locked me in, Amara. My son. I don't know how long they'll be gone." There was a stunned silence. Then, "Stay calm. Don't panic. Keep your phone on. I'll get help." She hung up before I could argue. I stared at the faint glow of the phone, clutching it to my chest. Minutes felt like hours. My body trembled from hunger and fear, but something inside me had shifted. For the first time in years, I wasn't crying for my son. I was fighting for myself. As I waited for Amara, I whispered to the empty room, "They think I'm weak. They think I'll die in here. But I've survived worse." And I meant it. Because if life had taught me anything, it was that a mother's endurance doesn't end when her heart breaks. It begins there. And so in that cold, locked room, while they sailed across oceans on their luxury trip, I began to plan the moment that would change everything. I don't remember how long I lay on that cold floor before the sound came. 3 sharp knocks on the outer door. Then a pause. Another knock, lighter this time. "Amara." Her voice slipped through the cracks, steady and urgent. "Eleanor, it's me. I'm here." Relief flooded me, so fierce it brought tears to my eyes. I managed to whisper, "They locked me in, Amara. I can't get out." Within minutes, I heard her outside, rattling the latch, her voice rising. "Who did this to you?" she demanded, fury in every syllable. When the door finally gave way, the air rushed in like a miracle. She pulled me out, helped me to my feet. I was trembling so hard my knees nearly gave out. "That son of yours did this," she said. "Oh, we're not leaving it at that." I didn't answer. I couldn't. Shame burned deeper than hunger or exhaustion ever could. Amara wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and drove me to her home. The world outside looked almost unreal. Bright sky, people laughing, going about their lives, unaware that a woman had just been locked away by her own child. When we got to her place, she made me tea and watched quietly as I drank. Then she said, "We're going to fix this. But you need to be smart, Eleanor. Not emotional, strategic." That word strategic stuck in my mind. For the first time in months, I stopped thinking like a mother and started thinking like a survivor. Over the next few days, Amara and I pieced together everything. She recorded my story, every detail, the manipulation, the property papers I had signed, the threats, the isolation. We took photos of the bruises on my wrists from pounding the door. We contacted a lawyer. A kind, young woman named Nadia who specialized in elder rights. When I first met Nadia, I was hesitant. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted my dignity back. But Nadia looked me in the eye and said, "This isn't revenge. It's justice. What they did is a crime." So we built the case quietly. Every document, every message, every trace of neglect. Amara even helped me install a small camera inside my home, hidden behind a picture frame, for when Daniel and Sabrina returned. I moved back into the house 2 days before they were expected, as if nothing had happened. My heart raced every minute. But I kept my voice calm when Amara reminded me, "Play the part. Let them think they've won." When their car finally pulled up, the tires crunching over gravel, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I stood by the door, breathing deeply, steadying myself. Sabrina entered first, tanned, glowing, holding shopping bags. She stopped short when she saw me standing there. "You're here?" she said, startled. "Where else would I be?" I asked evenly. Daniel followed behind, expression unreadable. "Mom, we didn't mean to upset you. You needed to calm down." Calm down? The words nearly made me laugh. But I stayed silent, watching, letting the camera behind the photo frame capture every flicker of their smugness. "We'll talk about this later," Sabrina said airily. "We have plans tonight." I nodded, pretending submission. "Of course, dear. Go enjoy yourselves." But that night, when they slept, I quietly made my move. I entered the living room and retrieved a small folder from beneath the couch, filled with copies of my will, my property deed, and a USB drive containing the footage of them locking me up. I added one more thing. A handwritten note. "You forgot who taught you how to fight, Daniel. You forgot that even kindness has limits." The next morning, I called Nadia. She and Amara came by before sunrise. Together, we reviewed everything. The recordings, the documents, the bruises. Nadia's expression hardened. "This will be enough," she said. "But we'll let them expose themselves further. You just stay calm." So I did. The next few days felt like walking a tightrope. Sabrina strutted through the house as if she owned it, giving orders, mocking my forgetfulness. Daniel barely looked at me. But I noticed something. A hint of nervousness in his eyes when I didn't react. When I didn't cry or plead, he didn't know what to do with me. I began spending more time in my sewing room, quietly stitching, humming to myself. Each hum a promise, each stitch a plan. One afternoon, as they prepared to host a small dinner with friends, Sabrina handed me a list. "Make sure the place looks good," she said. "I want our guests to see the house in its best light." I smiled faintly. "Don't worry, dear. I'll make sure they see everything." She didn't understand what I meant. That night, their guests arrived, wealthy acquaintances from Sabrina's world. Laughter echoed through the rooms, the clink of glasses, the shallow chatter of people who think money can buy character. When everyone settled in the dining room, I quietly excused myself and walked to the living area where my small television sat. The hidden camera feed was connected there, playing live through my USB. I turned on the TV, stepped back, and watched the room still. On the screen, Sabrina's laughter from weeks ago filled the air. "Rot in there, old woman. Maybe by the time we return, you'll learn some respect." The footage showed everything. Daniel turning the lock, me pounding on the door, their car pulling away. Silence fell like a blade. Sabrina froze. Daniel's face turned white. "What is this?" one of their guests gasped. I stood in the doorway, calm as ever. "Just a little home video," I said softly. Would anyone like to see how a son treats the mother who raised him? The room erupted. Gasps. Questions. Accusations. Sabrina stammered, denying it. Daniel reached for the remote, but Amara stepped forward from the crowd, phone in hand, already recording. Try deleting this, she said coldly. They had no defense. As their guests stormed out in disgust, I turned to my son. You took everything from me, Daniel. But you forgot one thing. I'm still your mother. And mothers, even broken ones, don't go down quietly. He tried to speak, but words failed him. For once, Sabrina had nothing to say. I walked past them, the weight of years lifting with each step. By morning, Nadia had filed the case. The recordings went viral within days. The story of an elderly woman imprisoned by her own child. Social services stepped in. Lawyers called. Their reputations shattered overnight. And me? For the first time in my life, I felt free, not because justice was coming, but because I had finally reclaimed my voice. They say time heals all wounds. I don't believe that. Time doesn't heal, it reveals. And what it revealed in my case was that silence had been my biggest mistake. The morning after the dinner scandal, the world around Daniel and Sabrina began to crumble. Their so-called friends stopped answering calls. The video had spread like wildfire. People horrified and raged, calling for justice. But I didn't celebrate. Not yet. There was still one thing left unfinished. 2 days later, Daniel showed up unannounced. No smile this time, no arrogance. Just exhaustion and fury hiding behind his eyes. Sabrina stood behind him, arms crossed, face pale but still defiant. How could you do this to us? Daniel's voice shook. Do you have any idea what you've done? I met his gaze steadily. Do I? I asked quietly. You locked me away like trash. You left me without food, without water. You told me to rot. And now you ask what I've done. He flinched, as if the memory itself hurt him more than the act. We didn't mean. Don't lie, Daniel. I interrupted. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The calm in it frightened him more than shouting ever could. You meant every word. Sabrina stepped forward, her tone sharp. You've humiliated us publicly. You ruined our lives. I looked at her, this woman who had smiled as she sealed my prison, and replied, No, Sabrina. You ruined your own. I motioned to the folder on the table. Inside are legal documents transferring this house back to me, along with a restraining order already approved by the court. You'll find copies with the police as well. Daniel's face twisted. You went to the police? I went to the truth, I said simply. He took a step toward me, anger flashing in his eyes. But before he could speak again, another voice echoed from the doorway. Firm, clear, authoritative. That's enough, Mr. Sanders. It was Nadia, my lawyer, accompanied by 2 officers. She handed them a set of papers. Elder abuse, unlawful imprisonment, and property fraud. You've been served. The color drained from Daniel's face. Sabrina's lips parted, but no sound came out. As the officers began reading them their rights, the silence that filled the room was different from the one that had haunted me months before. This time it wasn't fear, it was justice taking its first breath. When they were escorted out, Daniel turned to me one last time. His voice cracked. Mom, please. I didn't mean to hurt you. For a brief second, I saw my little boy again, the one who used to run into my arms after school, who once promised to buy me a big house. My heart twisted painfully. But then I remembered the dark room, the hunger, the sound of the lock turning. I know, I said softly. You just didn't mean to love me either. They left in handcuffs, and I stood there, watching the door close behind them. Amara appeared from the kitchen, eyes brimming with tears. You did it, she whispered. I smiled faintly. No. I just remembered who I am. That week, the news spread across local and national channels. Elderly woman locked by son wins case against family. The media called it shocking, heartbreaking, inspiring. Reporters showed up at my gate. Neighbors brought flowers and apologies for not noticing. But I didn't crave fame or sympathy. All I wanted was peace. The court hearings were swift. The evidence, videos, documents, testimony, spoke louder than any argument they could make. Daniel and Sabrina stood before the judge, stripped of their arrogance, faces blank as verdicts were read. They lost everything. The house was returned to me. Daniel was sentenced to community service and mandatory therapy. Sabrina to probation and fines for her role in the crime. It wasn't revenge. It was accountability. And when it was over, I walked out of that courthouse lighter than I'd felt in decades. For years, I'd carried guilt like a second skin, believing I'd failed as a mother. But as I stood under the open sky, I realized something profound. Forgiveness isn't about excusing cruelty. It's about freeing yourself from its chains. Later that week, Daniel came to see me. No cameras, no lawyers, just a broken man standing at my gate. I hesitated but opened it. He looked thinner, older, defeated. "Mom," he said quietly. "I wanted to say I'm sorry." I studied him. His eyes were wet, his voice unsteady. "Sorry doesn't undo what you did," I said. "But it's a start." He nodded. "I know. I don't expect you to forgive me." I sighed. "Forgiveness isn't something I give, it's something you earn, Daniel. And earning it begins with change." He lowered his head. "I'll try." As he walked away, I felt no triumph, only peace. Because I'd finally stopped chasing love that demanded my suffering. The next morning, I opened every window in the house. Sunlight poured in, warming the walls that had once felt like a cage. The birds sang in the garden again. For the first time in years, I heard my own laughter echo in the empty rooms, and it didn't sound lonely. Amara joined me for tea, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup. "You know," she said, "you could write a book about all this. Help other women find their voices." I smiled. Maybe I already have. Every scar tells a story. Mine just happens to have a happy ending. We laughed, the kind of laughter that comes after storms. The soft, fragile kind that means life has begun again. As evening fell, I sat on the porch, watching the horizon fade into gold. I thought about the girl I once was, the young widow who stitched dreams into fabric, the mother who gave her all, the woman who was told to rot. And I whispered into the wind. "You tried to bury me, but I was the seed." Justice had been served. The son who locked me away had been forced to face his own darkness. And me, I had faced mine and won. That night, before going inside, I looked at the stars and spoke softly, as though to every mother who's ever been silenced, abandoned, or broken by the ones they love most. Don't let their cruelty define your ending. You're stronger than they ever believed. Then with a steady heart, I closed the door behind me. This time from the inside on my own terms. It's been nearly a year since the day justice knocked on my door, and the house feels different now. Not just because it's quieter, but because it finally belongs to me again. Not as a possession, but as a sanctuary. Every morning, I sit by the window with my tea and watch the light spill across the garden. The roses have begun to bloom again, stubborn and bright, as if the earth itself decided to forgive. Sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I can hear children laughing from the street. It reminds me that life moves on, even after cruelty. Daniel hasn't come by in months, but I don't hate him. Hate is just another kind of prison, and I've already lived behind enough locked doors. He calls occasionally, his voice quieter now, stripped of arrogance. He asks how I am, if I need anything. I always tell him the same thing. I have everything I need, Daniel. Peace and a good night's sleep. Once he cried. And though I didn't say it aloud, a part of me forgave him in that moment. Not because he deserved it, but because I deserved peace. As for Sabrina, she vanished from our lives entirely. Rumor has it she left him soon after the case ended. Unable to bear the public shame. I wish I could say that gave me satisfaction, but all I felt was pity. Some people build their entire lives on greed and vanity, never realizing that love is the only thing worth keeping. The house, once filled with echoes of sorrow, now hums with quiet strength. I repainted the walls myself, soft cream and sunlight yellow. Amara visits often, sometimes with pastries, sometimes just with her loud, comforting laughter. We plant herbs in the backyard, share stories over tea, and talk about the strange way pain can make you wiser. One afternoon, she asked me, "Do you ever feel lonely?" I smiled. Not anymore, I said. Loneliness only grows where self-worth doesn't live. I've learned to enjoy my own company, and that's something no one can take from me again. She squeezed my hand. You've come a long way, Eleanor. I looked out at the garden, green, thriving, full of life. We both have, I said. In the evenings, I write in a small notebook. Not a diary. I've never liked that word. I call it my book of becoming. I fill it with memories, lessons, and small pieces of wisdom I wish I'd known sooner. Things like, don't confuse silence with peace. Never give love that demands your disappearance. And no matter how dark the room, never forget the strength that lives in you. Sometimes I think about publishing those notes someday, but for now, they're just for me. A reminder that even broken hearts can find rhythm again. The world may see me as an old woman, but I've never felt more alive. My steps are slower, yes, but lighter, because every one of them carries freedom. I often think back to that night in the locked room, to the words that once echoed in my ears like a curse. Rot in there, old woman. And I smile now, because they were wrong. I didn't rot. I rooted. And from those roots, I grew stronger, wiser, unshakable. So if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that strength doesn't fade with age, and that no one can cage a spirit that refuses to break, then I'd love for you to subscribe right now and stay with our little community. Every week we share stories like this, stories that heal, that empower, and that remind us, freedom has no age, and dignity has no expiration.